Kyle, the topic came up in my business line. Most people don't know this probably, that Amazon Web Services actually owns satellite antennas that help companies talk to their satellites. I believe they own roughly 12 to 20 around the globe. And they have a service in Amazon Web Services for downlinking your data from your spacecraft. So they do infrastructure as a service for antennas. Now, the hot take question is, Kyle, why do you think that they do this? Why would Amazon go into space?
Welcome to the Deep Chat.
Couple theories. First is that it's just like a pipeline for them. So, for example, if Amazon wanted to get into agriculture, as I'm sure there's some department somewhere in this behemoth of a company doing that, there could be some barrier to doing that. All that stuff works on a certain technology, so they might introduce a service that's like, not a smart business investment, but it's like paving a road between two places. The highway is a sunk cost, but now you can engage in commerce through that pipeline. So if that applies, maybe there's opportunities in space they want to get to. That's theory one. So it's just a channel for them. Theory two is that they think there's going to be some space internet situation and they want to be a big player in it.
Okay.
Am I even close to what you were thinking?
Very close. In both of them have some validity. So the reason that I know of, or what I think I know, and I know quite a bit because we have a good relationship with them. Amazon has a history of looking where data is moving.
Sure.
And they try to encourage people to use their platform to move data through their platform to purchase compute power on their platform. So, for instance, what did they do? They took a lot of MongoDB, right? People were rolling their own MongoDBs out everywhere, and they decided that they were going to rewrite MongoDB and offer their own service.
I thought that was Elasticsearch or perhaps both, but yes, there's a weird contention between open source projects and competitive services, and maybe a good lens to look at this from an antitrust perspective. I'm not weighing in, just interesting.
Right. So, but the bottom line is all of their services are generally not specific services, super specific.
I don't know about that. What about Amazon Cognition, which does sentiment analysis?
Okay. That's a little more specific, yeah. But if I was to drill down, I didn't know about that one, but if I was to drill down on that, I would suspect it would be general use for any company who might need to have an understanding of their outward-facing, marketing, right?
Lots of uses for it, yeah. And actually, it's Amazon Comprehend. So our Recognition is yet another service.
Yeah. Well, my point here is that it's always been my impression that Amazon wants to drive data in whatever fashion through their marketplace.
Yeah, and give you the tools you want to not have to worry about the cloud and scale.
One of the biggest impediments in communicating with a satellite is global ground antennas. Antennas that sit there across the globe in every country practically. The more that you have, the better comms you have to your satellite. So that is the largest barrier in terms of expense to infrastructure that if you want to launch a satellite, you might need to accomplish talking to your satellite. Mm-hmm. And what do satellites have? They have data. And so data needs to come down and go up. More data comes down than goes up. And if you're Amazon and you're looking at, space is the next big industry for data collection. I think that's pretty well documented. For those who don't know, there's obviously a lot of interest in space and satellites, in satellite communications. Multiple companies are launching many different satellites to do comms or internet from space. OneWeb, Starlink, what was the other one? And Cupier, which is Amazon's internet in space. And there's a lot of battling going on between those three. Mm-hmm. OneWeb actually went bankrupt last year, but then got, recapitalized through, I believe it's the British government bought a large stake in it. Either way, the industry, the space industry and satellites is still in its early days, and there's a lot of value there. And where is the value? The value is in the data collected from space. So if a lot of data is coming down from space, what does Amazon do well? They help people process data, right? And if the largest impediment is antennas to talk to your satellites, it seems as though Amazon, which is in the early days was yet really emphasized infrastructure as a service, right?
Right, for sure.
And so now they're doing that for satellite communications. The infrastructure required is the antenna. And beyond that, almost everything else can be software based and can live in the cloud. If you can have everything live in the cloud, and Amazon has the most antennas, and Amazon has the largest presence in the world for SATCOM, then why wouldn't you move your data through Amazon?
Yep.
Amazon they could potentially take a hit there in price if they chose to, because all that data would be moving through their cloud in some fashion.
Right. It could be like a loss leader.
Right, in a way, because it just, they take a loss on or break even on the actual downlink of the data, but then customers have to go and spend money to process their data. They're not going to do it in another cloud. That would be cost ineffective.
They got you coming and going, man. It's a racket.
Yep. So, exactly. So here we are. It touched on your two reasons, but that is the main reason. They don't necessarily at this point want to go beyond just saying, hey, here's your data in a very simple format. And a lot of times it's digitized RF. Like if you were to take a radio station, an analog radio station, and digitize it, that's what they're doing for the most part. That's what they're doing with data from space. And then it's up to you to take that digitized data and process it in a demodulator, decommutator, these things that turn the analog data into something that makes sense, right? And then post-process, I mean, the whole chain of satellite communications is very complicated. So Amazon generally doesn't get into the specifics of, as you said, maybe they do, but in space, they don't. It's so specific once you get the analog data turned into digital. Once you get that data, it's so specific beyond that, I can't imagine it would be a really great business model for Amazon to go into that space. Because like literally one checkbox in a modem can make or break the application. And you check that checkbox and it suddenly works. And then there's 1,000 other boxes that you could or couldn't check because it depends on the radio on the spacecraft. So it's so fine-tuned and detailed. It would make more sense for Amazon to let the marketplace solve the problems once the analog data comes down. You look quizzical.
Yeah, well, I was about thinking how strong I want to run the other way and say, why wouldn't Amazon claim that they're managing the biggest portfolio? They know how to set all those switches. Look, you got one of these, we got 10,000. You're no good with switches. We know everything about them. We're going to set them in the best possible way because we're experts. So pay us a premium for it, and we're going to service the whole thing.
That would sound like something that you might want to do, but the industry's just not there yet. It's quite simply very specific and takes a lot of hand-holding in terms of getting customers integrated and ready to go with a satellite to an antenna. It's more of like a boutique service that helps customers do that. That's what we do. You know, we are a managed service. So like Rackspace is a company that basically makes Amazon and the cloud easier for large corporations or small or medium, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's effectively what we do is we make satellite communications simpler. And they exist because there's a market for making it easier. We exist because there's a market for making it easier, though we were around before Amazon.
Can we do any parallels to the start of the telephone system? I mean, back then I got to believe there was a lot of complications in how it was getting spun up, who owned what, who paid for this and that. And now it's just kind of this ubiquitous thing.
Well, that is a parallel that we've drawn more so with cell phone towers.
Yeah.
Right? You don't know which cell phone tower your handheld
And I do not want to care.
And you don't care. And by the way, did you know that random people own the towers and AT&T and Verizon lease equipment to put on them?
Interesting.
It's like I know a guy who owns like 10 cell phone towers and generates over 30 years. It's very predictable revenue. So he generates, it's like rent. He rents to them, but they sign these 30-year leases and he amortizes it and, purchases the land, puts up the antenna, maintains everything, and just he's a landlord.
Yeah.
And he does really well by owning these. I had no idea that exists.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was always under the impression, man, that doesn't scale well. AT&T and Verizon putting up their own antennas everywhere.
Big investment, but yeah, they've essentially crowdsourced that investment.
Right.
Carve a path for an entrepreneur to create the service we want to buy.
Right. That was an aside, but the point is that in the early days, no, that didn't exist, right? It didn't exist where your cell phone could hop on someone else's network when you were out of network.
Right.
I don't believe in the early days, right? You either had coverage or you didn't on the network you were on.
Pretty sure.
And then they set better standards, and over time, you started to get the roaming, right? No, you're roaming. You're on someone else's network. You got those warnings. Eventually, those went away because they had yet more standards and agreements amongst them, I believe. I don't know. I've never had a roaming charge, or maybe I don't look at my bill.
Yeah, I bet not. I certainly don't.
Nothing seems out of the ordinary,
right.
Though, so it's not like I got a $5,000 cell phone bill. But the point being, yes, this industry is fairly early and fairly complicated in terms of standardization. So that's one of the major problems, and we always talk about it in the industry. Could we have better standards? Sure. Who's going to set the standards? Well, then that becomes a problem, right? And then our company is going to want to adhere to those standards. There's no major consortium. And that's why 5G is such a conversation within aerospace. Is 5G communications going to be the standard, right? But then as you drill down, you find out that, what does a standard really mean? There's a digitized RF standard. But guess what? Everybody tosses their own little things into the headers and makes it non-standard.
Sure.
So even though there's a digitized RF standard, it's not really a standard. So it's very difficult setting these standards. I'm surprised any of them ever get set.
Yeah.
How did the cell phone industry do it so well? I'd be curious.
Yeah, that's interesting. There must have been some sort of governing body and, what do they call it when corporations work together? It's a term that comes up.
Yeah, consortium.
Consortium, there you go, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, it eventually will get more standardization and easier and more ubiquitous to use, right? But we're just not there yet. So you need a lot of small companies that help people cross that threshold. And we need more vertical integration, companies that can, help you launch your spacecraft, companies that can help you downlink your data, companies that can help you monitor your spacecraft, health and safety, and then companies that can help you process your data. I mean, there's a whole chain, and it's a very complicated value chain, and each step of the way is it's technically challenging. So anyway, to sum it up, Amazon is in the business because they want to capture data.
Sure.
Not necessarily data, but dollars that people spend on processing and accessing their data from space.
Yeah.
And a very simple cutoff point is the digitized radio frequencies that come into the cloud. It's a very logical cutoff point because if you try to go further down that chain, it gets more and more specific, and there's no real good cutoff point to hand it over to customers.
That's always been a fickle line for Amazon that they kind of dance around. To what degree are they like an underlying utility versus a more direct service provider?
We'll see. I mean, they may decide to extend, but I don't think they have a history of getting into very specific things.